If at first you don't succeed, secondary succession of Point Pleasant Park after Hurricane Juan.
On September 29, 2003, Hurricane Juan made landfall in Halifax, Nova Scotia, causing extensive ecological damage. Tourism Nova Scotia 2025 notes that Point Pleasant Park, a 75-hectare forest that includes 39 kilometers of trails, was significantly affected. According to Larder 2016, post-hurricane, 75% of the park, described as an even-aged, old-growth evergreen forest, was destroyed. An old-growth forest is described as a forest that has had the opportunity to develop without the presence of disturbances, as defined by WEED in 2023. Due to the forest being even-aged, all the trees were roughly the same height, enabling strong winds to go through gaps and uproot trees. Years after the devastation, ecological changes such as species richness, diversity, and evenness were noticed. These changes are signs of secondary succession, which is defined as plants and animals recolonizing an ecosystem after a major disturbance. It's defined by Britannica Editors 2019. Tourism Nova Scotia 2025 also notes the park's significance to the Mi'kmaq Nation, as it was traditionally a gathering place known as Amtugadi, which means spiritual place or the place of spirits. The objective of this study is to identify changes in the overall forest community metric and how the densities of dominant species did or did not change from 2004 to 2025. And this study considers two hypotheses. The null hypothesis predicts that secondary succession has not produced any significant change in the forest community metrics or in the density of dominant species over time. And the alternate hypothesis predicts that secondary succession has significantly changed the forest community metrics and the densities of dominant species over time.
Study site selection. To investigate secondary selection in Point Pleasant Park, data was collected from the same 6 20 by 20 meter plots that have been used for the last 20 years to ensure consistency between these years. Plots were initially selected based on having some of the highest levels of disturbance in the park post-hurricane. Tree density for each species was recorded by tallying each living tree above 2.5 centimeters in diameter at 4.5 feet above the ground level. Species identification was completed using a list of commonly occurring species provided by our lab instructor as well as iNaturalist. Diameter at Bryce height, or DBH, was measured for every tree with diameter tape. Finally, for data processing and analysis, all data calculations followed formulas from the BioL 2060 laboratory manual. For each of the 6 plots, tree species density, total tree density, species richness, mean DBH, Shannon diversity, and Pylos evenness were calculated and put into a table provided by our lab instructors. To examine the long-term trends in secondary succession, linear regression analysis was performed using data from 2004 to 2025 in order to quantify changes over time and to assess whether Point Pleasant Park is progressing towards a later successional stage.
For this question, the null hypothesis predicts that there will be no significant change in the forest community over time. The alternate hypothesis predicts that there will be a significant change in the forest community over time. Figure 1 shows a significant 24.6 times positive increase in total tree density over time with a p-value of 3.9 times 10 to the negative 13. Total tree density increased from 4.75 trees per 400 meters squared to 117.2 trees per 400 meters squared. This data proves that the forest is filling in after the significant disturbance of Hurricane Juan. Species richness and Shannon diversity also both rose significantly, indicating that over time more species have colonized in Point Pleasant Park. As the forest continues to move towards its climax community, we can predict that the total density will eventually plateau. As interspecific competition increases for light, water, and nutrients, trees will naturally self-thin, per Vandermeer and Granzo de la Cerda. Due to this competition, we can predict that fewer trees will survive, but the ones that do will increase in size, increasing the average DBH over time. We will fail to reject the alternate hypothesis as there was a significant change in the forest community over time.
Regarding this question, for both dominant species, the null hypotheses predict that there will be no significant change in density over time, while the alternative hypotheses predict that there will be significant change in dominant species densities over time. Figure 2 shows a significant positive increase as the p-value equals 0.0004 in red spruce density over time. In 2004, it was the only dominant species present, but it was present in low densities. By 2024, the number of red spruce trees per 400 meters squared at each site increased, reflecting the progress of secondary succession. Figure 3 shows a significant positive increase as the p-value equals 0.0003 in red maple density over time. In 2004, it was completely absent from the community, but by 2024 had become the more dominant of the two species, as the number of red maple trees per site had increased largely. Both dominant species, red spruce and red maple, are now present and have established themselves in the community. Red maple is the more abundant of the two, despite not being present in the forest community at all in 2004. From 2004 to 2024, the total density of both dominant species rose significantly, indicating the progress of secondary succession. Both of the dominant species increased in density, reflecting a more stable and structured community that is growing towards maturity. Due to secondary succession, we can predict that as the forest continues to grow, dominant species density will reach a climax, and there will be fewer fluctuations within the dominant species densities. Therefore, we will fail to reject the alternate hypothesis, as there was a significant change in dominant species densities over time.
So for this question, our null hypothesis says that the Shannon Diversity Index should not change over time. The alternative hypothesis says the opposite, that the index will change as the forest continues to recover from disturbance. When we look at the graph, we see a clear positive increase in Shannon diversity from 2004 to 2025. The p-value is extremely small, 1.4 times 10 to the negative 8, which tells us this trend is statistically significant. Shannon values rose from about 0.53 in 2004 to about 1.52 in 2025. This steady climb reflects recovery after the 2003 hurricane. The regression model also supports this strong long-term upwards trend. This rise in diversity reflects natural successional processes. As species establish over time, the forest becomes more structurally complex. Shrubs reduce wind exposure and trap leaf litter, while low-lying plants create additional feeding and sheltering zones for ground-dwelling animals. These changes support higher species abundance and evenness, two major driving factors of a rising Shannon index. As the forest progresses towards a climax community, the Shannon index is expected to level off. Mature forests experience strong competition for light, nutrients, and space, reducing the rate at which new species can successfully establish. Once the community reaches a relatively stable equilibrium, diversity should stabilize near the system's carrying capacity. Because we observed a significant long-term increase in Shannon diversity, we reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative hypothesis.
Based on the observed data, the Acadian forest in Point Pleasant Park is best described as being in a mid-successional stage. While total density, species richness, and Shannon diversity have all increased over time, the average DBH is still decreasing. This indicates that the canopy is not yet complete, meaning large, mature trees have not yet reestablished themselves in the community. As an urban park, Point Pleasant Park faces factors that influence recovery stage, such as soil compaction and the fragmented structure of the forest. Per Correa et al., heavy foot traffic compacts soil, which can cause inadequate rooting, reducing roots' ability to thrive and grow. Tree species are regenerating rapidly, but individuals are not growing to larger sizes. Additionally, the forest's ability to grow a full canopy is compromised by trails throughout the forest and the removal of safety hazards such as fallen trees. This creates gaps, allowing more sunlight for seedlings trying to establish and grow. The red maple is considered a shade-intolerant species by Jocham et al., so this weak canopy supports the results found in Figure 3. These two factors help explain why Point Pleasant Park is currently experiencing increasing total density but decreasing DBH, which is consistent with a mid-successional recovery stage. The Institute for Integrative Science defines two-eyed seeing as a principle highlighted by Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall, who describes it as combining the strengths of both Western and Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing. The Institute for Integrative Science also notes that the late Mi'kmaq spiritual leader, healer, and chief, Charles Labrador of Acadia First Nation, once said, "Go into the forest. You see the birch, maple, pine? Look underground and all those trees are holding hands. We as people have to do the same." Adopting two-eyed seeing helps us view Point Pleasant Park's recovery to a mature Acadian forest in a positive way. It combines objective data of recovery and spiritual knowledge, highlighting how we as humans must work together to preserve the land we live on, just as the species in Point Pleasant Park are working together to rebuild the beautiful forest that was once there. In conclusion, we will fail to reject our main alternate hypothesis that predicted that secondary succession has significantly changed the forest community metric and the densities of dominant species over time.
We would like to acknowledge that Amtukati, or as we know it, Point Pleasant Park, is located on the Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. where it has been nurtured and lived in for hundreds of generations. We would also like to thank our peers for reviewing our presentation and providing feedback in the editing process. It also must be acknowledged that this research would not have been possible without the organization and guidance of our course coordinator and lab instructor and our teaching assistants. Two-eyed seeing can deepen our understanding of how forest dynamics change over time by allowing us to view the ecosystem through both Western scientific methods and indigenous ways of knowing. Western science offers structured data, such as succession patterns, species abundance, and long-term monitoring, while indigenous knowledge provides high-context understanding grounded in centuries of years of living with, observing, and interacting with the land. By braiding these perspectives, we gain a fuller picture of forest change. Indigenous knowledge highlights relationships, interconnectedness, and the cultural significance of species and processes, while science helps quantify trends and tests hypotheses. Together, these approaches can help us see that not just how the forest at Point Pleasant is changing, but why it is changing, in relation to the broader patterns of the Acadian forest succession across the region. This combined perspective strengthens ecological understanding, stewardship, and decision-making.
In addition to red maple and red spruce, other tree species may also dominate in this type of volatile environment. In unpredictable environments, various weather conditions can cause disturbances in the forest community, leading to secondary succession stages. Secondary succession, as previously discussed, is a community development process in which species and community structure change and evolve throughout stages of growth to reach a climax. Typically, a climax is reached when the previously disturbed forest reflects the regional climate norms. In Nova Scotia, there are two types of ecological land classifications, the Acadian boreal forest and the Maritime boreal forest. These classifications reflect the climate norms. Some of the species of trees found in the Acadian and Maritime boreal forest communities can be considered to be edaphic climax species. An edaphic climax, defined by the Government of Nova Scotia 2021, is when a community cannot reach a true climax due to local extremes. The species found in these populations are dominant species. The species that are typically found in these ecosystems are black spruce, spruce pine, white ash, and tamarack. Therefore, being that these species are considered edaphic climax species, they could dominate in this volatile environment during mid-stage succession after disturbances due to unpredictable weather conditions.
After the hurricane, wind dispersal was the main natural seed dispersal technique advancing the forest recovery, and it strongly influenced the past and present successional stages. Per Nashville Tree Conservation Corps, red maple is a shade-intolerant pioneer species, meaning they grow very fast after a disturbance and they produce lightweight samaras, which are the seeds that are shaped like propellers. Wind carries these very easily, allowing red maple to rapidly colonize in the sunny gaps in the canopy created by the storm, meaning they dominate during the early successional stage. Nova Scotia Forestry describes red spruce as a very shade-tolerant mid-successional species, and White, Ressler, and Carroll highlight that they also rely on wind dispersal, but they establish more slowly. These trees grow beneath the growing canopy rather than immediately after a disturbance. In this ecosystem, wind dispersal is particularly effective after a hurricane because the sunny gaps in the canopy and increased flow of wind help seeds travel farther, giving pioneer species like red maple an advantage early on, but also preparing the forest for species such as red spruce. Finally, this slide and the next are the references that we used.